So next up, we have Phil Nash. So Phil Nash is a developer evangelist for Twilio and a Google developer expert. He's been around the web playing with JavaScript and is always working with new technologies and writing open source code. I always see him online doing all sorts of really cool stuff. And he likes to make his own beer, which I think is really cool. Do you have any beers you're making at the moment, Phil?
No, none right now. No, it's been a little bit while since I did that, actually. Just enjoying the local breweries instead at the moment.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely support local. Melbourne has a lot of awesome craft breweries that I've really been enjoying checking out myself. But today he has an awesome talk about 4 steps going from JavaScript to TypeScript, showing us how we can move an existing JavaScript project onto TypeScript. So take it away, Phil. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Mel. And hello, NDC Melbourne. I'm very excited to be talking here. I think this is the first time in a long time I've given a conference in the place that the conference is even online located. So I'm kind of excited. Welcome from Melbourne. Yeah, as Mel said, my name is Phil Nash. I am a developer evangelist at Twilio. If you don't know Twilio, it is a communications platform. That is, it's a whole bunch of APIs that you can use in your applications to do things from sending text messages and making phone calls all the way up to video chat and full-on contact centers. If you ever want to know anything about Twilio or ask me any questions about what I'm talking about today or whatever, find me online. I'm all over the place as Phil Nash on the internet, or just drop me an email at philnash@twilio.com. I'd be happy to get back to you. But let's talk a little bit. Thanks, Jeffrey. Let's talk a little bit about moving things to TypeScript. By the way, do shout out in chat if you have any questions as we go along, and I'll try and answer things. But let's talk about moving to TypeScript. I do want to first start and clarify that I absolutely love JavaScript, and that's what I have spent most of my career working with, it seems. And so TypeScript has been an interesting thing for me. I mainly got into JavaScript because I didn't like types. But I'm at that stage of my career apparently now where I'm back into types again. So I've got no problems with JavaScript and I love working with it. But what about TypeScript? How about moving to that, and why would we want to? Well, modern JavaScript development, I mean, I was working with JavaScript back in the day when a single 1,000-line JavaScript file was perfectly reasonable. And that was not a great thing, I guess. But these days, in modern JavaScript development, we have bigger projects, we have bigger teams, and more tools than ever to ensure that we are writing code and writing our applications correctly and can work well together. And TypeScript becomes just one of those tools, of course. So there are a bunch of reasons that you might want to move to TypeScript. And that first one is, of course, type safety. And I know this is NDC, so there's probably a bunch of people happy with type safety in C# and the whole .NET world. And so moving that into the JavaScript world as well is an excellent thing. The tooling around it as well. I'm using VS Code a lot, and we'll see that in a bit. And just seeing that tooling and things emerge and make things a lot easier, and we'll see it as we go through demos later, is amazing. Refactoring, of course, becomes an important and easier thing to do when we have that type safety backing us up, regardless of who wrote that code in the first place. And ultimately, I think all of these things lead to confidence in our applications doing the things that we want to do. There are, of course, reasons not to move to TypeScript. Or these are not the reasons to choose to move to TypeScript, if that makes sense. So don't if you are scared of the learning curve, or if you have a team of developers who've just got involved in JavaScript and you're now trying to shift them on straight to TypeScript. Like, there is a learning curve to go at this. It's not the same as writing JavaScript. The overhead. You may already have quite a build pipeline for your existing JavaScript applications, and adding another tool in front of that, which is actually compiling all of your code together, may well cause you problems. So that is a good reason maybe not to move to TypeScript. Don't move to TypeScript because it gives you the idea that you don't need tests. Like, types are not a replacement for tests. I will always say that. And finally, don't move to TypeScript just to pick up new JavaScript features. Firstly, so many of the new JavaScript features have already made it into browsers or into Node.js, depending on where you're writing this. but otherwise, there are other tooling that you can use for that. So, don't choose these reasons. Choose the previous ones. Choose that confidence. But ultimately, it is up to you and your team whether you want to move to TypeScript and how you want to do it. But what I want to do is show you, if you have a JavaScript project right now, kind of 4 steps that you might take that can lead you towards TypeScript and perhaps greater confidence in that code base. So I have a demo application, which I'm going to quickly show you. It is a relatively simple Node.js application. It's running a web server, so I have an index there that's running the server. I have a server which is setting up some routes, and I have one single messages webhook route, which is going to fetch a dad joke, excellent, from my dad jokes file here. So I always like to keep myself amused whilst I'm working on things like this, and so if I do. And so this is then, it works with webhooks, so it goes through Twilio because that's, of course, what I spend most of my time dealing with. But if I send that message off, it's going to go through this application and get me back a joke, such as, I am terrified of elevators. I'm going to start taking steps to avoid them. Good. So that is the application. It doesn't do an awful lot, but it is, it's a bunch of JavaScript files that we can move together. Let's carry on. Let's head on into step 1. If you want to move to TypeScript, one of the easiest things is to allow your tooling to kind of help you get along that way. And as I said earlier, I'm using VS Code all the time these days, and I absolutely love VS Code and the things that it makes available to us. And that leads me to kind of the step 1, in which TypeScript is built into VS Code, right? It's the TypeScript, VS Code, it's all Microsoft built. And it's built in, so we can use it, and it's available for us. And what we can do, and it's the first thing that I end up doing, is head into settings, search for check.js, and right here under JavaScript and TypeScript, we have implicit project config. That's a little small, so I'll read it out, check.js. And this actually allows the VS Code itself to employ the TypeScript compiler to check your JavaScript code. To see if TypeScript agrees whether it's decent or not. It can use JSConfig and tsconfig files, so I don't have those in this project right now, but it has already thrown me up an error. So you can see a problem down at the bottom, or this little red tab up here. And I admit this is not a bug, but it's something I snuck into this project in the first place. In that this function here does not take any arguments. It's like empty thing there, but VS Code itself via the TypeScript compiler has decided to show me that I've made a mistake. I've added an argument to a non-argument taking thing. So I can do that. That's cleared my problems, and the application is fine. Now, the thing is, I don't have to clear that problem. It's just inside my editor that these complaints are being made. And so this is a really nice way to at least have TypeScript via VS Code in this case check on your work without kind of impacting the end result necessarily. Nothing's failing to compile here. There's no compilation step for the actual project. It is just checking and giving me warnings, giving me notifications about that. And so that's, I think, really cool. There are some downsides to this. It is only in the editor, so it's not actually affecting the thing ultimately, and you can ignore any of those warnings if you want to. It is native in VS Code and Atom, but not, as far as I'm aware, in other IDEs or editors. If you do decide that this is an important thing for you, but then you can't get over the fact that there's a red squiggly line in there, you can include sort of TypeScript comments to ignore lines or ignore entire files if you want to. But leaving TypeScript comments in a JavaScript code base could well be confusing to other developers on your team if they're not on board with this change yourself. But I do recommend, in general, turn on check.js globally in your editor if you can, or find if you're in another editor, find a plugin that's going to work for you and do this as well. Turn it on globally and just have that extra check from from TypeScript's type system. And why not? It can only help improve your code. So let's move on. Step 2 is actually to get the TypeScript compiler involved slightly. This is time to actually install TypeScript to your project, installing TypeScript using npm into your dev dependencies. and then initialize it with npx tsc. This is going to create you a tsconfig file, tsconfig.json file that looks a bit like this. I mean, it will have a bunch of other options in it. There's a lot of commenting out. There's a lot of good commenting and documentation inside this file, and that's really useful. However, this tsc init and this initial tsconfig file is pretty much built for creating a JavaScript project, sorry, a TypeScript project from scratch. And so it comes with options like these ones. But we want to probably change a few of them. So for a start, I'm going to change the target from ES5 to ESNext. And what this means is that this is stopping the TypeScript compiler doing any cross-compilation down to lower versions of JavaScript or ECMAScript, I suppose, in this case. Because you may have your existing build pipeline in between this, we don't actually want TypeScript to be doing that work. If you already have Babel involved, we don't want TypeScript to be doing that and then Babel do it again. We can move that out. But at this point, we're not putting TypeScript involved. So keep it as ESNext, and you can use your existing pipeline as you were. At this stage, we want to put allow.js onto true. This is because we still have JavaScript files, or in fact, our entire project is made of JavaScript files. And so we actually want those JavaScript files to go through the TypeScript compiler themselves. But for this stage, we're going to turn check.js off. And this is actually the opposite to our previous step. But it's just allowing us to send our JavaScript through the TypeScript compiler and make sure it's OK. We'll also change our root directory and out directories to make sure that those are getting right. And we're going to turn strict to false as well, just to make sure. One other update we have to do once we've added TypeScript to this is we're going to change the package.json. A couple of things here. Like initially, that main was probably source and index.js. Now we're going to change that to dist and add a couple of scripts so that we can do this compilation. And I'm just going to go back to the demo project and do that. So I'm going to npm install to my development dev dependencies TypeScript, which happened nice and quickly. And then I can npx tsc init. And that has created me a tsconfig file. Cool. So like I said, this has a load of commenting in, and that's really useful. But let's make our little changes that we were going to do. Let's not compile away some of the later JavaScript features. Let's turn on allow.js. So JS files can go through the compiler, but they won't actually be checked for now. We're going to change our root.dir and out.dir. So the out.dir, we're going to set it off to head to dist, and root.dir is where the files all are right now. And yes, we don't want it to be strict right now. We'll get to what strict does later. We've done that. We now need to get into the package.json because that is no longer going to be dist index, and that's crashed my file there because nodemon now doesn't know what it's looking at anymore. In fact, I don't have a dist directory yet, so that's fine. So I will need my extra scripts here to both build just TSC, and I like to have a watch script as well. You can pass the watch argument through to the build script, but that makes it easier. So if we do that, I can then run npm run watch in my left-hand corner there. That's going to do my compilation. And nodemon now picks up the dist index file, and my application is running again. And it's now being TypeScript compiled, not checked, but TypeScript is taking all the JavaScript and then compiling it into the dist directory, and we have our output here. And what's really nice about this, actually, if I go and take a look at the output, really it hasn't changed anything, which is kind of nice. This is the output. This is the original source, and all it's really changed is my white space. Which is fine. I'm okay with that. I don't have to look at 4 spaces, which is too many spaces if you ask me. So it's putting it through there. We are taking our JavaScript and pushing it through the TypeScript compiler without having to check it. We can make sure this entire thing works again and get ourselves another joke as well. I always like to ensure things are still hilarious on the dad joke side of things. Why didn't the number 4 get into the nightclub? Because he's too square, of course. Cool. So yeah, TypeScript is compiling our application and it's not checking it. That's fine. Let's head back to the slides. Next up, we actually want to bring that checking back in, of course. Like we've managed to push our application through the TypeScript compiler, but it's not really done anything. And, you know, if we have been previously pair programming with VS Code and with TypeScript in your IDE, this stage is probably not going to cause you too many problems, which is kind of nice because you've already checked it. And ideally, your project is as a JavaScript project that TypeScript already agrees with. So in this case, we now have to back in and update our tsconfig to check the JavaScript and make sure it's okay. And at this stage, you might find that that things start to come up with errors. Now, this has confused me recently because this doesn't necessarily happen, but TypeScript has either taken in all the types for Node already, or it's figured all this out for itself. But in the past, this is definitely something that's useful, and it's not something I'm stopping doing yet. So you probably want to install the types for Node itself. That's if you're doing a Node project. Of course, if you're in the browser, you maybe need something different. But if we include the types there, these types come from the Definitely Typed project. If you've not heard of that before, it is a phenomenal open source project to go alongside TypeScript, where the community decided that typing modules was a job to be done, and started creating all of these under the @types organization in NPM, all of the types for modules that didn't have them already. It's absolutely wonderful. I've got a link at the end of this, which gives you a history of Definitely Typed, and it's a really interesting read as an open source project that also now has some kind of guidance and protection from the actual TypeScript project. So let's go back and head into tsconfig.json, and we are turning check.js on. There we go. You're going to check stuff. And see, it's not complaining, but I will just, for completeness, install types node to my dev dependencies just to make sure. And let's put that back into compilation. And we're away. Yes, good. So that is now loaded again, and jokes should continue to come in. Now, as I said, because I ran this through check.js in the first place, it is this project is now actually fairly happy. If I was to put back in my unnecessary method, that would actually stop the compilation over the butt there. So we've got an error, and it would kill it. So we can take that back out again, and we're back online. Cool. So this was a nice, easy one, but that's only because we pair programmed with VS Code on step 1. Now we could stop here. At this point, the TypeScript compiler is taking the JavaScript. It is checking it and outputting it to our dist directory, and we have now, as best as it can, TypeScript's thumbs up appreciation for our JavaScript. And that's cool. And we could, then start to work on our pipeline. If you did already have Babel, we could change that out for compiling to ES5 using our tsconfig file. If we wanted to, we could stop there. And there's actually some more benefits to this. We have types checking the JavaScript. We can actually add further type annotations using JSDOC. So we don't have to stop writing JavaScript. We can add extra types with JSDOC. And I think this is really cool, and I'll come back to it in a second. And finally, you actually don't need to output anything either. This output dist directory, that's fine. But if you don't output it, it's still doing the checks, and you can still have like a CI system or something fail. And this is actually what the Webpack project does, or has been doing for a while now. Rather than outputting to a dist directory, you can just have the no emit true setting. That means it's not going to emit anything, but it is going to run the compilation and check everything and throw errors if it doesn't work. So that's really useful. And when Webpack did this, they both caught errors in the Webpack code base and caught errors in the TypeScript code base at the same time, which I think is kind of a great symbiosis between the projects there. So at this point, you could have JavaScript, your JavaScript application, and you still run the JavaScript that you wrote, but TypeScript is keeping an eye on it, and that's nice. And like I said, JSDOC, I think, is kind of amazing. It's TypeScript without writing TypeScript, although it is with writing some types. JSDOC, if you don't know, looks a little bit like this. It's it's surrounded in comments, and you can set types on, for example, just a variable here. If we say this is type string, if later in our program we try and set foo to a number or an object or something, TypeScript is going to have a problem with it. And we can do the same for functions, typing the parameters and returns. Like if you've used JSDOC to just document your code, you're actually a step ahead again here, in which you can use the TypeScript compiler to then take those types and work with them. So let's just show that in action as well. I'm going to go to my my actual dad joke function here, and what I'm going to do? Well, so we've seen in the slides there, you can just type regular functions or variables. But what I want to do is just I can create myself a full-on type here. I'm going to create a dad joke type, and in this dad joke, we're going to have a property that's a string and it's a joke. And it turns out that this API actually returns two other things, which is an ID, a string, which is an ID, and a property, which is a string, which is a status. And we can know about that. And what we can say is that if we just actually move this slightly, we can get our dad joke. Const dad joke is result.body. And then we're going to return dadjoke.joke. Cool, but we still don't know what this actually is. It's still down as any in TypeScript's mind. But this is where we can now actually type this right here. We can just say the type is a dad joke. And that is going to tell TypeScript and the compiler that this dad joke is now a dad joke object and result. And dadjoke.joke is a string, and that then flows back through our application. So this message becomes a string, rather than before we added the type. Oops, where did it go? Before we added the type, I just commented out a comment. That's possible. How about that? Before we added the type, this is just any, and removing any's and adding types is pretty much our aim here, so we can be more confident with this code. So yes, this message is now a string, and that is cool. We could also, we could be typing this function as well. I'm not going to carry on right now. We've got this new type, and we're using it, and it is implying things about the application, and TypeScript knows about that, and so it can fail the build based on this kind of thing as well. And I think that's pretty exciting. TypeScript without actually writing TypeScript, just by documenting your code. Coming out of code is nuts. Anyway, step 4, moving to actual TypeScript. Finally, right? We could have stopped at that last step, and I kind of like that. But if you really, really want to go all in on the whole thing, then we need to move our JavaScript files into TypeScript files and do something with that. I'll just go back to the code for this, because I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to start at the end kind of our things and start change this file to TS. And when you do that, it now has problems because a couple of reasons. One, TypeScript wants to work with ES6 imports. So I'm going to change that to import superagent from superagent. And then we want to export the same thing as well. So in this case, I'm going to export this as default. That's where it came from. And that's fine. That's now a TypeScript file, which is working for me. That's cool. And these types from JSDOC are still applying, which is also cool. But webhooks, which is importing the dad joke, is now having a problem with this. It's like this doesn't exist. And that's just because of a difference between default exports and setting module.exports to a function or an object. So what we can do here is either, if we want to keep this in JavaScript for now, because at this point we're quite good, because because in our TypeScript config file, we are both allowing JavaScript and checking it, and we're now sending TypeScript files through. we can actually have this hybrid application. But in order to do that, we do just have to change our default import there to require default, and that's made it work, compiling happily at the bottom there. And we've moved one of our files to TypeScript. It's pretty cool. But let's move another couple. Let's rename that to TS and see if anything else comes up. There's a bunch of then imports that I have to change. Let's see how far I get with this. Yeah, we'll import that as well. I just know that the next line is not an import, and it's going to confuse me otherwise. And then we can actually let's import our dad joke properly, dad joke module properly from there, and we don't need default anymore. Cool. And one more time, we need to export that properly as well. And that's going to change it in the server now, and it's going to have a problem. But I'm just going to set that to default right now. I don't think we have time necessarily to go through all of our files right now. But you can see, this is a nice one we can change. Like rather than exporting a whole module, we can change this to export default port equals that. This is something you may not have to have changed either in your application if you are building with ES modules. Default const, of course. And once we do that, it's not happy with me. Well, all right, I'm getting that wrong today. I would like to undo that and just put it back to whatever it was before, because clearly I've got something wrong. Anyway, moving on. We now have our partial TypeScript, partial JavaScript application, and we can continue working through this as bits of the application become good for time for refactoring or working on. We can change it to TS, move it. If you need to change default imports, then you can change those as we get through. But this is quite good. I don't think we're done just yet, though. We have moved to TypeScript, but strict mode then becomes of importance to us. Because we turned that off originally, and strict is allowing us to do a whole bunch of things right now that maybe we wouldn't want it to. And so TS config and TypeScript actually has a bunch of strict options, such as no implicit any, and this is probably one that you will find you are failing all over the place. No implicit any means that you can't kind of import or use or return just the any type without being explicit about it. And so we'll see in a minute that we are already importing a bunch of implicit any's. We don't want to do that. There are a bunch more options here, and I recommend you kind of read through them. The nice thing about our TS config file is that we can just kind of uncheck them one by one, pick the ones that we think are important to us, uncheck them, or turn them on until we get all of them done, and then we can just turn on strict mode, and we're fine. Now, let's go and have a look at that. I'm going to put strict mode on in my TS config. I'm going to enable it for everything. There's not too many problems here, but I should see a problem coming up. There we go. Haha. So over here in my dad jokes module, I am importing an implicit any effectively. There's no types. There's no declaration for what super agent is. Super agent is my HTTP module here in this case, but I don't have any types for it. So this is sort of implicitly any. So if I just npm install, and again, this is one that definitely type has sorted out. So I've got @typed, and this is a bit small at the bottom of my screen, but I'm installing @types super agent, run my compilation step again, and it is now happy with me. Cool. Yes, and so we actually have this whole type system set up for it. Now the thing is, like, full strict mode is not required. It's not required in TypeScript. It depends on how far you want to take the abilities of TypeScript through to your application. It can be a goal, and that's the point. Strict mode, in its absolute strictness, when we are changing an application over from this, making that a goal of the eventual transition, will allow you to have TypeScript do as much checking as it possibly can. But in the meantime, as you are moving, it does not have to be that full strictness. If you are starting an application in TypeScript, I recommend like setting strict mode to true from the very beginning. And that way, TypeScript can do its best work all the time. And then we can start adding more types. Once we're done with this, we can add more types. Now we've already sort of started typing up our dad joke here, but now we can actually make it sort of TypeScript official, right? And we can instead make an actual type, which will have a joke, which is a string, and then we've got an ID, which is a string, and a status, which is a string. And we start to get TypeScript to get into our actual application here, and now we can specifically say that this is a dad joke. The result is that. One thing I wanted to mention actually about turning strict mode on is that things like I'm going to show you this just quickly because I forgot about it. One of the strict modes is that this function here, may return a string, but if something goes wrong, it's just going to log and return nothing or undefined. But over here, TypeScript is just like, no, fine, it's a promise, it'll return a string. We're okay with this. Moving to strict mode, is going to mean that actually now understands that it is a promise, which is a string. It could be undefined, which is fine. So we should handle that. So here we can, this is what this conditional is for, handling in case we don't get a message back, not crashing the application. So yeah, now I'm returning this dad joke properly, and we know that's going to be a string, and the result is string undefined. So we can start typing this function as well, which is cool because we are taking nothing and returning a promise that will eventually be a string or undefined. Nice. So we're starting to see more and more types. I like to go back to the webhooks one as well, because we can start typing things like our routes here. So we can add from express, we can get its request and response types. And whilst the request here is not that useful in terms of typing it because we're not actually using it in this particular version, the response is quite good because we can start, response is a generic type, and we can start telling this that ultimately the response will be called with a string or indeed undefined. And that is, either a string here or right at the bottom. Oops. Right at the bottom, if we don't respond with any actual text. Yeah, move the G over somehow. And that's important because if we then try and return a number, for example, it is also going to have a problem with that. So like you said, this is going to be a string or nothing at all, and now we have a number. And so we can keep adding these things as we move on through our application, just adding more and more types and just beefing up the power and the understanding of TypeScript's compiler. Yeah. Finally, we've got to, if you're doing library development, this is an important one, especially if you're moving a library from JavaScript to TypeScript, is to, in the compiler options in tsconfig.json, put that declaration to true. And that's going to, once you've compiled and output the JavaScript, it's also going to output those .d.ts declaration files, which provide TypeScript types to the rest of the ecosystem. Super important there. So we made it, and I feel like that deserves one more dad joke just to end the fact that we've turned this project almost entirely into TypeScript. I've got a few files there to go, but there you go. What do you call a cow with no legs? It's ground beef. Excellent. We made it. Let's have a recap. Let's have a look back at what we did. So first up, pair program with TypeScript. This is something you can turn on in any project, even projects that you, in any JavaScript project, even JavaScript projects that you have no wish to turn into a TypeScript project in the end of the day. Adding, or turning on in VS Code or in Atom, check.js and the TypeScript thing, or finding in another IDE a plugin that will add TypeScript checking for you, turn on check.js, and it will give you those warnings to tell you that TypeScript might not agree with this. And because it's only in your editor, it's just telling you as you program with it, and so you can take that and use it as you will. But for the most part, TypeScript is normally right about things. Step 2, we can then get the TypeScript compiler involved. And at this point, it's about making sure your application can go through the compiler with all the JavaScript files you already have, and you're kind of reasserting how your application uses that. So you then have your output file, your output directory, as well as the input directory, and we start working, running the output file, but working on the input directories. That's still all working in JavaScript still, but TypeScript is just taking a quick pass through and pushing it out somewhere else. Step 3 then becomes making sure that TypeScript compiler will fail if there is JavaScript that fails its typed situations. So checking JavaScript. And as I said, we can stop here. It's what a bunch of projects do, and it's real useful to kind of show that TypeScript agrees with this, but we still only wrote it in JavaScript. And at this point, again, we can use JSDOC, and TypeScript is going to read those types and listen to them. And then finally, move those JavaScript files to TypeScript files. If you have requires, if you have CommonJS requires, move them to ES6 imports, and then start adding more types until you are happy with your system. So I've got a demo repo. I've got this application. It even shows the thing that I couldn't apparently do right myself whilst I was trying to change the config file to TypeScript. But check this out. I'll link all of these in the slides, which I'll publish later. We have the demo repo here. There are some really good resources. If you want to take a more slower and at your own pace read through this, then actually my colleague Dominic wrote a blog post on this on the Twilio blog. Go check that out. It also has another example project that you can kind of work with and work through as well. If you want to know more about using JSDOC to add superpowers to your JavaScript and use TypeScript without actually using TypeScript, check out Stefan Baumgartner's blog post on this. Just search for TypeScript without TypeScript. That normally brings it up. And then TypeScript actually has the TypeScript documentations has a bunch of JavaScript projects that use TypeScript. So that's like Webpack and other projects that use TypeScript but don't actually get written in TypeScript. They just use the compiler to check their work. It's really interesting to see what other people do. There's some other links, like I said at this earlier. Definitely Typed is an amazing project, but it, given its importance to the entire ecosystem, has been through a lot. So go check out the blog post on Definitely Typed the movie. And then finally, Eric Elliott published quite a good blog post on the TypeScript tax, and this is sort of interesting if you want to look into those reasons that you wouldn't move to TypeScript as you're weighing up this decision, if that's the kind of thing you're going for. So that's all I got for you this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about TypeScript, about moving JavaScript projects to TypeScript. I hope you enjoy the rest of NDC Melbourne. And as I said before, hit me up online. I'm Phil Nash everywhere all over the internet, or drop me an email at philnash@twilio.com. Other than that, thank you so much. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phil. Can I just say that I absolutely love that you used a dad joke API for your demo. I'm going to have to start using that in all of my future demos. And we do have a question on Slido. So this is a question from David. It says, yes. As you convert, should you aim to get rid of all any's in your code, or are some of them okay?
Oh, that's a good one. Are some any's okay? Because of course, the tsconfig, like no implicit any just stops you from like not acknowledging that there's an any, but having some any's, I don't think you can entirely get rid of them. It's an interesting one. I mean, if you think about an API result like calling off to an API, that is bringing you back something you expect to exist in the form that you can give it a type of, but really it starts as an any anyway. Now we merge it into something that then looks like an object that we have, but you know, you can never get rid of everything, especially at the edges of your systems. On the other hand, though, I think it's a good aim to kind of remove that as much as possible. Again, it's as much as moving everything to strict mode is not the ultimate necessarily, not necessarily your ultimate goal, but a useful thing. Same for kind of removing any's as well. I think if it's useful for you to ensure that this is in fact this type, then yeah, get rid of it. That's where I go with it.
Yeah, sounds good. Good take. Look, I absolutely loved your talk. I'm definitely going to go check out all those resources that you shared with us. So thank you very much for joining us today, Phil.